Hi, everyone. I'm Joanna Yaz, Readings and Special Programs Manager at the NYU Creative Writing Program. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's reading by two fantastic fiction writers, both celebrating brand new novels, Chang-rae Lee's My Year Abroad and Brandon Hobson's The Removed. My colleague Darin Strauss was supposed to be here tonight, but sends his regrets. He's sick, unfortunately, but he's written an introduction that I'll read in a moment. First, I wanted to let you know a little bit about tonight's program. Brandon will read first, and then Chang-rae, and then the three of us will talk for a bit, and then you'll have a chance to ask your questions. Please send your questions through the chat, keeping in mind that we may not be able to get to all of them. And you don't need to wait to ask your question till the end. If you send it through when it comes to mind, feel free to send it over then. So pretend this is Darin Strauss, who is a little taller than me, black and white, some scruff, and a deeper voice, but I'm not going to imitate the voice. I'm really sorry to be missing this event, and not merely because it's me falling down on a part of my job. I happen to be a big fan of both Chang-rae Lee and Brendan Hobson, two of our most brilliant and relevant voices. I've admired Chang-rae's work for a very long time. He's been an important part of my own development, which of course is not nearly one of his biggest accomplishments, at least outside of my household. But I am missing the event. I have a 101.6 fever, which is a good name for an FM classic rock station. I would say pause for laughter, but none will come, and for good reason. Chang-rae Lee cast such a huge shadow over my graduate school experience that when his first book came out, it was a shock to realize how young he was. Native speaker won so many awards, had so many fans. It was downright jealous-making for me and the people with whom I studied. I thought, who is this guy with all the accolades and bestseller list, and how dare he? Those petty feelings, writers are writers, some of us cop to it is all, vanished as I read the book. How many novels are important and great, smart and typical? Native speaker is all that and more. And he's followed up that masterwork with a brilliant novel every few years. I particularly loved 2010's Pulitzer finalist, The Surrendered, though all his stuff is great. 2014, On Such a Full Sea, for example, is one of the most well-crafted novels of the last decade and is set in a dystopian future, just to show he can do anything. The restraint of that book's voice is so intense and finds its opposite in its ambitious and exhilarating, wide-open new novel. My Year Abroad, just out, feels so urgent because it addresses what I hadn't realized was the vital fact of this sad moment. It's about our compulsion, our society's inability to stop coming back for more. It's about the scams we not just believe, but want to believe, our need for stuff we don't need. It's a book we'll be talking about for a while. Now I realized I did something I said I wasn't going to do, which is I read Chang's intro first. So what I'm going to do is keep reading and introduce Brandon. So Brandon, we'll stick with our order. You'll read. We'll follow our sometimes tradition of doing both intros at the beginning. Brandon Hobson has made his name fast and indelibly. From the beginning, he had an original and ingenious voice. His first books, Deep Elm and Desolation of Avenues Untold, established him as a writer of ultimate promise, and his breakthrough novel, Where the Dead Sit Talking, one of the most lauded and best novels in recent memory, fulfilled that promise. A National Book Award finalist, a winner of Reading the West Book Award, a best book of 2018 almost everywhere. Where the Dead Sit Talking is a coming-of-age story like no other. It turns 1980s Oklahoma into Joyce's Dublin, or Faulkner's Mississippi. The Native American community of that time and place is so thrillingly rendered, I would often dream about it long after I put the book down. Sequoia, the 15-year-old Cherokee narrator, is a brilliant and welcome Holden Caulfield for right now. His brand new book, The Removed, is that rare bird, a novel of social importance and brilliant literary storytelling. It is both a reckoning for American injustices and a beautiful, searing novel on a personal scale. It is both large and small in the best ways. Brandon has proven himself yet again. So it's an honor to welcome Brandon Hobson.
Thank you. Thanks, Joanna. Thanks to NYU. Thanks to Chang-rae Lee. This is a real huge honor for me to be reading alongside Chang-rae Lee. I've read him for several years and just am really honored to be included here. So I'm going to read just two short sections because I really want to hear him a lot more than I want to hear myself. So I'm going to read from The Removed, which just came out last week. And this first section is the novel's about a family 15 years after a police officer has shot their 15-year-old son, and the parents have taken in a foster kid who's 12. Wyatt outstretched his arms like wings to illustrate birds flying away. I pictured Ray, could almost remember him in this exact room, making the same gesture with his hands, a deja vu. And yet I knew that Ray had never come to the shelter with me when he was alive. I tried to remember a time when he had fluttered his hands like birds, but I couldn't recall. He was in an elementary school play once. Maybe that was it. The vision dissolved as quickly as it had come. Wyatt read. Late the next morning, he awoke to find himself surrounded by a group of children. They were all looking down at him, their eyes wide in wonder. One of them said, "Are you Chala, the man who will save us?" "I'm looking for my wife," Chala said. "But first, I will help you find your way home." He began to lead the children back toward their village, determined to return them safely. They walked past the mountain, then followed a trail through the woods. They walked under dark clouds, thunder sounding in the distance. Soon a light rain began to fall. By the time they reached the village, the thunder grew louder and the rain was coming down harder. "I have to go," Chala told them. "Beware of the soldiers," the children warned him. I was a little stunned by listening to Wyatt, almost entranced myself, even as Wyatt got up and returned to playing ping pong. The rest of the time at the shelter, Wyatt seemed like a normal kid again, talking about movies and music with the others. "Wyatt has something special," a supervisor named Hank told me. He put an inhaler in his mouth and sucked in. "I put out fires all day, every day," he said. "Some of these juveniles are runaways and criminals. Some get kicked out of long-term placement for getting high or stealing from staff. Others get picked up by the police and brought in. It's a rare day when there isn't a fire to be put out." I had seen kids come in and out of the shelter for 20 years. The court placed them in the custody of social services, and they sat in the shelter and waited to be placed in group homes. Then they might run away from the group homes and return to the streets, and the whole cycle would start over again. When I worked at the shelter, it was my job to meet with the kids when they were first brought in. After they changed out of their street clothes and showered and put all their money and jewelry and baggies After they carried their bed sheets and pillows down the hall past the medical supply room to their rooms, I would sit with them as they told me everything that happened on the streets. They opened up to me. It was a gift. I rarely had to do much, maybe smile and tell them I would try to help them. Part of my job was just listening to them, these kids who had seen enough in 6 months to provide a lifetime of nightmares. One of the boys, the older boys, came over to Hank and said he needed his medicine. Hank called for a staff member to come over. Paolo needs his asthma meds, he said, then showed the boy his inhaler. I have mine right here, so I feel for you, son. Hang in there, it'll get better. After Paolo walked off, Hank told me that Paolo was 16 and had lived in 7 different foster homes since he was 12. I remember working with a lot of kids exactly like him, I said. Paolo's dad is one of those low-grade knuckleheads who wears flannel shirts and drives a 1993 Firebird and chews Red Man. Paolo's a good kid, though. Maybe I helped a few over the years. I hope so, anyway. We watched Wyatt give high five to some of the smaller kids. Then he came over and I asked him what the title of his story meant. I thought you knew Cherokee, he said. Only a little, but I didn't catch the title when you said it. Dosta da Nade, he said. It means my brother. And I will read just one other very short section here that is from the point of view of Chala, who is a spirit ancestor. Beloved, the earth will always speak to us when we need to hear the most. Even in my time, we were worried about rising oceans and burning land. I always looked for warnings. Our family believes strongly in Tecumseh's warning of the soldiers coming to remove us from our land. There was a drought. There were high winds and a bitter cold winter. You are aware that this was a terrifying time for us. We were frightened, but ready to defend our home. Our people would refuse to leave, even though we were tricked by the government with their fraudulent treaty. We did not trust them. It was raining the night we rounded up a few families and quietly snuck away to hide in a cave in the mountains. I told the other people in the Cherokee language, what we do will affect our people for years to come. I thought of all my visions, our visions, the prophecy of the coming migration, and hoped they would be proven false. That night, in the cave, one of the wives was so afraid for her new baby that she ran out into the rain with a tomahawk yelling, "Kill, kill." She felt the presence of a spirit's strength so powerfully that she threw the tomahawk into the night sky in the rain, and it never came down again, was never found anywhere. That night it hailed large ice pellets. We were there 10 nights before they arrived to destroy our homes. We watched from afar as the ones who swarmed on our land like a pack of wolves began firing their weapons. Now there was a great threat upon us. The soldiers were ordered to be civil, but they destroyed our cabins and barns. They slaughtered our chickens and hogs and cattle. They prodded our wives and elders with bayonets as they forced them out of their homes and to stockades. By the end, many of our people had nothing but their clothes. Everything else was gone. We felt a great misery spread throughout our land. Soldiers dug into graves to steal the gold from our dead, never bothered by the stench of corpses that filled the air. Though we were safe in seclusion, two other men and I couldn't stand that we were not helping our people. So we set out, armed with our weapons. And you, my brave son, you came with us. At once the soldiers saw us approaching, and soon they surrounded us. We attacked and fought, but there were too many of them. One of them hit you with a shovel, and I lunged at him with my knife, cutting his arm. The other soldiers pulled me off and held me down. They tied us with rope. I told them to kill me first, but they did not agree. I closed my eyes and lowered my head as they pointed their rifles at us. I begged you not to open your eyes, even when they told you to. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hey, Brandon, thanks so much for that. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Very haunting. I was startled too by the when you said Ray Ray, because some friends of mine call me that, and I thought, oh man, oh man.
It's funny.
But thank you, Brandon, and thank you, NYU, for inviting me. And it's great to be here with a fellow writer of such talents and deep heart, obviously. And our books are out this week, which is great. So I thought I'd read just about maybe 5 or 6 pages, and then we can have a conversation, which is always more fun. This book is narrated in most part by a young man named Tiller. He's 20 years old, and he meets this Chinese entrepreneur in his town, with whom they'll go on some adventures together, again in some sticky situations. And this is early on in the book, when just the first time he meets this fellow named Pong. So this is Tiller talking. I never wanted to be responsible, even if it meant freedom, even as I grew up with my single-parent dad, Clark, who didn't get home until the early evening, stepping into the house from the back door after his walk from Dunbar Station and calling out in his commute-weary tone, "Hey, Till, I'm home," which is when he'd heat us a quick frozen pasta dinner from a box or take us out for a burger or burrito. We made the rounds around Dunbar, like a lot of other lonesome father-child duos. There were plenty of our kind in our divorce-rife town. And when I was younger, I could sometimes score a free soda or a side of fries with a glum overbite, the waiter or waitress feeling sorry for me. I never made dinner, nor cleaned the house, just stayed up in my room doing homework or playing games online. A nice lady from Poland came twice a week to vacuum and do laundry, a landscaping crew weekly to cut the lawn, but otherwise I was reposing solo. Clark's one rule was that I never unlocked the front door, that I never opened it unless there was something like a fire or child molester drooling after me, and it was the only way out. None of this makes any sense. You'd better lock the back door first, if not all of them, but he was fixated. This was obviously more psychological or metaphorical than anything else, which even as a middle schooler I understood to be important to him. And so this was the prime directive for me. Not that I not have friends over, or that I stay out of the liquor cabinet, or not try to cook anything on the stove. I didn't do any of those things, even though I sometimes wanted to. It's not that I was afraid of something bad happening or my dad finding out. As noted, he wouldn't have freaked out. It was that I had zero interest in being the presiding party, because being the presiding party means you have to retain order and sometimes holler at people and keep an eye out for trouble and be the responsible one, all of which is a total drag. But the thing is, I am responsible now, and in a way I never imagined I could be. not just by taking care of things, not by way of being the type who's steady and maintaining, but by understanding the need to alter the moment, whether directly or indirectly, and then decisively doing so, and not worrying about what the future might bring. For example, I don't know for sure if it was Todd Brown's SUV that was involved in the crash, and if it was, whether another person associated with him will soon be loitering in the neighborhood again. I don't know what good it would have been. I don't know what would have been a good, better, or best action for Val. I don't know how any of this will ultimately affect me. All I know is a video of me slicing that tire wall kept popping onto the screen of my mind, and I gave myself over to it like the most enthused bride, a response I can only credit to my time away, which was most definitely abroad, if not so wide. But I'll explain. It was midsummer, and I had a few weeks to kill in Dunbar before I was to fly off for my official study program, and as usual, I had to make money to help cover the room and board for the year. Clark has been a salaryman for a well-known global financial services firm, and we live in Dunbar Village and not sprawly New Dunbar Crossing, just on the other side of Route 111. So people assume we're just as 1%y as most of the other folks around here, but really, he's one of the countless mid-level managers in a huge back office facility that's not even in New York City, but in post-industrial New Jersey, though right on the train line, which is why we can live way out here. Clark prefers not to drive. He earns just enough that he pays almost the whole tuition for my definitely not selective enough liberal arts college, but because his sister, my beautiful Aunt Dee Dee, is the way she is, and will reside for the rest of her life in her nearby group home for autistic adults, and has no one else but him to look after her. We have to be careful about our spending. So while my Dunbar friends rode air-conditioned coach buses to sleepaway camps in Maine, and then in later years flew to summer enrichment programs at Oxbridge and Stanford, I've worked every summer mowing neighbors' lawns or walking their dogs, and then, from the time I was old enough, scooping ice cream and bussing tables in a number of the many town eateries. I didn't mind not going away. I would have despised summer school and felt sorry for the zombie instructors burnt out from the regular year but desperate to make extra bank. I would have enjoyed camp for sure, because most kids do, but even a totally gross job like dishwashing can be worthwhile, if not for the usual reasons. Sure, you can't help but develop some grit in the face of being shat upon hour after hour, and come to realize how exploited most people are. But the main thing you learn about yourself and everyone else toiling away is how much of your mental activity and chatter is about dreaming of doing something else, whether noble or debauched or downright silly. Most Dunbarites, adults and kids, are already doing what they imagined, or at least believe they are. Growing up in Dunbar and attending a private college where the kids might casually say things like, I feel like treating myself to a snowboarding and spa weekend, and actually mean it, you'd think I'd be inured to this kind of privilege. Truth is, I never much cared about the swank life. It did bug me that I never got off the wait list to be a tag-along for a friend's family trip to Cozumel, or to some dad's corporate box at MetLife Station, or the Sweet 16 birthday bash at a Michelin-starred sushi place in the city. I heard details so exhaustive of said junkets that I could practically feel the powdery spray of the off-piste at Vale, wipe my chin of the buttery Wagyu grease they kept jawing about, but never actually went on anything special, unless you count getting invited by Isaiah Pan and his family to Six Flags and getting those skip the line passes, which made the day great. Clark was too old school sensible and frugal and dad clueless to offer hosting any such outings, and it never occurred to me to ask. At the washing job, we worked in threes, and I partnered with different guys depending on the shift, but none of them could stop talking about their imminent trajectories. Take Piquette, an ex-con who for some reason wanted to open a chain of mani-pedi studios, or Clay Weinberg, a stout, filthy-mouthed teen who wanted to write and direct sci-fi pornos, or the gray-haired former acid freak whose real name we didn't know, so we just called him Jerry, after Garcia, who was studying tax accountancy at the community college so he could do people's returns. "Hey, Jerry, you could do my dad's taxes next year," I shouted to him after he told me his final term was almost done. This through the din and fetid searing steam of the washers. I was in the clean out position, clearing the leftover food off plates and emptying glasses and letting the conveyor take them to Jerry, who'd slot them as fast as he could into a tray and then push it through to the double-doored washer, which after 30 seconds was clawed out on the other end by a guy wielding a hook. Does he have a self-employment income or foreign investments and limited partnerships? Jerry yelled back, though he actually never yelled, just sort of intensely whispered. I don't think so, I said. He just works for a company. I think he has a 401k. With great prudence, Jerry shook his big nose at me. Then he should just get one of the popular computer tax programs. They're really very thorough and so easy to use. Okay, hey, check out these scallops. Jerry never wanted any of the leftovers like Piquette or Weinberg would, and I plucked them off with tongs and set them aside on a big platter just for edibles, which we called the toilet. This was the most important part of the job when you worked clean out, to make selections for the toilet. I was more discerning than others, but the one basic rule was that the food item could have no bites taken out of it. So whole raviolis were always toilet ready, but not linguine, which could have dangled from a diner's lips. Never mixed salad, but definitely a clean spear of pickle. Fries were always fine, except if they were smudged with ketchup or cheese sauce. The exceptions were any remainders of cocktails or wine, which were immediately gulped down. We picked at the toilet all night like it was green room catering. You'd be amazed what Dunbar diners left on their plates, especially the older ones and the 2-iron thin ladies, who might eat just 2 jumbo shrimp out of 5, or take 1 cut out of a perfectly good strip steak that was slightly too rare for their taste. I'd eat off a plate if I was super famished, often after a couple tokes out back with Jerry or one of the bussers, and then only if it was something the diner couldn't possibly have spit out. I might have worked at the restaurant the rest of the summer had I not last minute subbed one day for an acquaintance of mine at the local country club where he caddied. I knew pretty much nothing about golf, except for playing a golf video game once and watching Caddyshack multiple times stoned. But he said it was a member guest tournament and all I had to do was forecaddy, which meant positioning myself in the area where people would hit their shots and helping to find errant ones and raking the bunkers and holding the flagstick during the putting. Because the caddy master knew I knew nothing, he put me with a foursome none of the regular caddies wanted. I guess nobody wanted them because the member was a beginning golfer and his shots went all over the place, and because of the assumption that his three guests would be no better. The member was a cardiologist named Patel, a big, strong, chatty lefty who indeed hit his shots long but very wrong, and sometimes dead sideways, and once even backward. An amazing unintended trick shot that he accomplished by just barely undercutting his teed up ball with a ferocious swing, creating such wicked backspin with the top of his metalwood that the ball went almost straight up in the air, landed a few feet in front of him, and then spun back to where the rest of us were standing. Dr. Patel's guests were 2 of his colleagues, another tall Indian guy, and a chubby Jewish lady who was actually quite good, as she'd played some high school golf, plus a friend of his named Pong Lu, who was a chemist at one of the big pharmaceutical companies headquartered nearby. And they all broke up like crazy after the shot, with Dr. Patel helicoptering his club into the bordering native grasses and raising his hands in victory. I retrieved it for him, and he let me have one of the cocktails studding the cup holders of his cart. The whole day went like that. After the first 9 holes, I was totally beat, running back and forth from the woods that framed every fairway, searching for their tee shots, stepping ankle deep into streams to retrieve dunked ones, and raking the sand after they basically strip mined the bunkers, trying to blast their balls out. The chemist, Pong, was the worst at the beginning, but not by the end. He had never played before, not having even once gone to a driving range or a putt-putt. For the first 6 holes or so, he pretty much whiffed on half of his swings, and then the ones he did strike often didn't fly as far as the massive pelts he'd excavate, these lush, beauteous mini islands of sod. On one green, he needed 7 putts before holing out, putting clear off the green not once but twice. and he almost brained his host when he shanked a fairway wood, the shot whizzing past Patel's ear so closely that the cardiologist swore it nicked his earlobe. Patel laughed about it, but absently massaged it the rest of the round, and then touched his fingers to his lips, as if tasting the haunting liquor of oblivion. But that was Pong's last really awful shot. His swing was certainly funny looking. Imagine a pirate sabering himself free from a knotty mess of rigging. But he began making solid contact, and if they weren't majestic, his shots started landing near the fairways, then near the greens, then sometimes on them, and he suddenly got a feel for the speed and slope of the surfaces, holing a few long putts. He even chipped in. He actually made a legit par on the last hole, which Dr. Patel said was the toughest on the course. As I was loading the group's clubs onto a golf cart to ferry them to the bag drop area in the parking lot, Pong told me to take his clubs back to the pro shop, as they were rentals. I said he ought to buy his own set now, for how well he was already playing, and he said, no way, joking that his brilliant career was over. I could hardly decipher brilliant career because of his peculiar pronunciation, which I could tell right away was because he was a native Mandarin speaker. I sort of took Mandarin 1 and 2 my first 2 years of college, and the instructor, Miss Wu, had that same way of speaking English, with all those gargly sh and r and to sounds. Anyway, I said some of the final shots he hit were freaking amazing, and he admitted that he had spent the entire night before studying instructional videos on YouTube on every aspect of the game, including dress and etiquette. But watching a video and playing are totally different things, I said. They are not so far apart if you try to focus on something fundamental. What is that? I asked, curious as to what he'd gleaned. To follow through with fullness, he said, sweeping his hand forward and upward, right up to the sky. This sport is fascinating, but it takes too long to be useful for someone like me. I would prefer if only 9 holes were played, just long enough for enjoying the game and for doing business. There would be more time for camaraderie afterwards as well. We have an eternity for camaraderie now, Dr. Patel announced brightly. Time for some serious drinking, my friends. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much to both of you. I just realized both your books have the same exact pub date.
Last Tuesday.
Yeah.
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 So happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
It's always a painful birth.
How has it been this past week of having a book born in a pandemic?
You go first, Brandon. My throat is dry.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was laughing so hard at the at some of the golf descriptions there that I mean, Caddyshack is funny enough without being stoned, so I could imagine.
Isn't that? There. But that's how you're supposed to watch Caddyshack,
right? Probably so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as far as the pandemic, I don't know. Everything is so strange right now that it feels. I don't get as nervous if I actually have to be somewhere and read in front of people. My social anxiety takes over, and I end up having 3 glasses of wine beforehand, and or one too many, right, to try to settle the nerves. And
well, you should do what Steingart does. He takes beta blockers.
Nice. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's different. I think I don't have the experience I think that Chang-rae does, as far as being able to sort of go out and really do a whole lot of public readings, right?
Well, I as I was normally this week, I'd be out for 3.5 weeks every day, just traveling around, and by this time a week in, I would still be energetic, but probably gotten sick, and my voice would be going, and yeah, probably too many drinks after the readings with friends in that town, and kind of burning it at both ends. And actually one time, because I was traveling every day, you know, like a different flight every morning to a different city, and you know, just with your carry-on bag, that I thought I had developed gout because my hands stopped working, because I think I was lifting my really heavy carry-on in the, you know, in the overhead compartment. And I actually had to see a doctor in like Portland, Oregon, because I
Oh,
was
wow.
I thought because of, you know, all the rich food and the wine, and then that I had gout, but it just turned out I had a really, really bad carpal tunnel. Yeah, so this has been very, you know, sitting in your sweatpants and
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
it's
You're
been
wearing
fun.
pants? You're wearing pants? That's okay.
That's my story.
We have
Yeah.
a positive comment in the chat from Julie saying, pandemic must be a good time to have your book come out. We are all home and reading and here, which is true.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question that I think some of the new writers here will be curious about, and hopefully will have to navigate themselves. Both of you had very early successes and then followed them up with great subsequent work. What are the pitfalls of early success, and how does one avoid them?
Well, I don't know that I had any early success. Honestly, I had a couple of books that were small press, you know, that nobody read, really. So it's not. I didn't have like. It's not like I had a debut that was. I mean, it was.
I'd say early-ish, like that little National Book Award thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, that was the last book. The last book. But I had, you know, a couple out before then that were also small press that I don't think, you know, it was. So, what was the question? Was it specifically?
Pitfalls
Sorry.
I mean, questions about
Oh, the
pitfalls of
pitfalls.
early success, but it could just barely be about pitfalls of success. Maybe things
Yeah.
that didn't go as you thought they would, or things you might have done differently, or.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, that you know, there. Again, I want to, you know, to be here with Chang is just such an honor, and you know, the scope of his career just is really amazing to me. And so I feel like, yeah, I mean, the last book got a little bit of attention, and this one's getting, you know, some good attention, which I'm very grateful for. But I don't have that sort of early. I mean, Chang's first novel, right, in the '90s, you know, was just came out of the gate, just, you know. So he could probably speak better to that.
Well, I too, you know, had a book before I published Native Speaker, which came out in '95.
Oh,
And
okay.
well, and it was never published. It was just, you know, you at least had a small presses to publish your first books. Mine was never going to see the light of day. You know, I suppose it got me into graduate school, but only because I, you know, showed 20 pages of the 600, and if I'd shown them the 600, they definitely would not have let me in. So you know, it's so I always felt as if, with, you know, after, you know, getting some nice attention for the first book, and the second book, I actually think got nicer attention from you know, people I really cared about, which was very satisfying to me. And maybe that was what, you know, I was kind of focusing on, not the response so much, but it kind of reminded me about, you know, why we all do this, which is, you know, and this is maybe the problem I had with that first unpublished book, was I think I was more interested in being a writer than actually doing the writing. You know, so focused on that, so focused on my ambition and trying to make a name and having a place, you know, having a spot. And you know, I was living in New York at the time, and living in New York can, you know, that can kind of, you know, be an accelerant to all that in a bad way, right? Because, you know, you have all these writers famous writers around, you're involved, and and I was kind of, I wouldn't say deeply involved in the literary social scene before I was published, but I was very aware of it, and so that gives you energy, but it also can sometimes give a certain kind of energy that makes you focus on the outcome rather than the thing itself. And so I think I was always, I think after my first book, I tried to remind myself why I think that first published book did okay, which is I really cared about it, and I really put a lot of work into it, and I really put a lot of thought into it, and at a time when I didn't have any aspirations for it, to tell you the truth.
Mm.
I was just in graduate school and out in Oregon and enjoying life out there, and really just getting into all the things that people at NYU and at your place and we were just getting into all our conversations, really focused, really dedicated. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't for books, but I think I was doing the right things, I think, and I tried to remind myself of that, and I try to remind myself of that every book. Don't worry about what happens.
Um, both of your new books seem very much necessary in this moment. But books take years. Are the political implications of your subject matter to our difficult right now something you think about?
Yeah, I think my book, first of all, isn't very long. I think Chang's book is a very good length. Mine's over 200 pages. It's really not a very long book. I think, though, and I talk about this, I always start with, Chekhov says that fiction should explore questions, and I always start there. And in terms of right now, thinking about, I started my book thinking about reading about articles about violence against natives, and especially police violence against Native teenagers, and thinking about how that wasn't getting a lot of national attention. And so in a way, yeah, it's serious stuff. There's a lot. We've had a lot of conversations about how colonization plays a role in terms of what we can talk about and what we can't talk about, what people expect, especially when you have a story of about natives. And so I think it's definitely more serious, or more involving more sort of serious issues than I think my early books. The first couple of books are a little bit more less political, if you want to use that word.
Yeah, I was thinking, listening to you, and then this new book, Brandon, that I wondered, I don't know how long it took you to write this book, but given the environment that we'd been in, especially with police violence, and obviously in the news it was against young black men, but I wondered if that was something that informed the book, or maybe took the book in different directions than it might have been. I was curious about that.
Well, it was actually before, this was back in 2018, it's just a few years ago, but it was before a lot of national attention was that we saw last summer, of course. But I was just thinking about, and I don't want this book to take away from that, or from police violence against people of color in general. But I guess I was thinking more, how young people are getting blamed for having mental issues then that sort of gives, you know, the excuse for them to be shot or to be, you know, sort of mistreated by the authority. And I wanted to parallel that with what the U.S. government did when Andrew Jackson did the same thing, which was basically told the, you know, the tribes, many tribes, you have to leave, and then the migration for at least Cherokee, I can only speak right to Cherokee and you know, the other 4 tribes that ended up in Oklahoma. That violence I wanted to parallel, right, with that. Not much has changed, it feels like, in 200 years by the authority. So yeah, but Chang, what about you as far as
well, this book, you know, it's taken a long time to write this book, because I was kind of working on it the last 5 years. And it's strangely a book about, you know, trying to go out into the world and savor it as much as it allows us to savor it, which is a funny kind of book to come out right now. Of course, I wrote this before the pandemic. And then the other half of the book is a domestic story where they're intentionally cloistering and hiding and just ordering everything online and just kind of being a little family unit inside. So it's kind of weird to me, actually, to be publishing this book at this time. I mean, I would hate to think people would think, oh, he just wrote this book and tried to describe our moment. But there was something about what, you know, it wasn't political at all, or maybe it was, you know, it was written in, I suppose, the Trump era, but there was something about the sense that I just had personally, and that you know, maybe in this virtual world we do need to get out a lot more, and that's been reigning since, you know, for probably the last 10 years, where we just steadily have all these filters and intermediary modalities. You know, right now, of course, we're Zooming because we have to, but even when we don't have to, we do it, and, you know, through other means. And I guess that's something that I saw in my kids, and there was something about looking out at the world and being in the world that I think I was already missing, even as I had it, or already missing, and realizing I'm guilty of it too, you know, and wanting that a certain spark of vitality again that you can only get by, you know, rushing headlong sometimes into things.
Elizabeth England asks, how did autobiography fuel both first-person personas? How much, quote, fiction went into the narratives? And that can be for either one of you or both.
Brandon, why don't you?
Okay. I mean, nothing really in this book. You know, in terms of autobiography, one of the fun things about fiction writing is being able to get inside the heads of many different characters and watching them sort of, for me, you know, develop. And there's a great pleasure in that. You know, and there's also that, you know, Murakami talks about the dream state. He talked about in an interview once that, you know, part of when we write fiction, we're able to, you know, they exist in a sort of dream, and we're able to let our dreams kind of continue, right? And there's a pleasure in that I find in fiction writing. And so, I mean, as far as this book, you know, the short answer is no. It's kind of like Popovich. ask when the interviewer asks Popovich, why did you lose the game? And he said, we didn't score enough points, right? It's kind of the same, so that's the, the short answer is nothing autobiographical. Now, I mean, you can say that, my ancestors, they migrated to Oklahoma, and we've, researched that a little. My brother actually is doing and has done a lot of research about the family, tree and migration to Oklahoma, which is really fascinating. But other than that, and my interest in sort of thinking about, are people educated about, forced removal of native tribes and stolen land and how natives were treated and continue to be treated. Those are the more sort of serious things, I guess, I wanted to explore. But I mean, the family and the stuff of the book that exists within the within the family isn't anything autobiographical.
Well, this book is kind of funny for me because people always assumed, especially since it was my first book, Native Speaker way back when, was autobiographical, and it was absolutely not, none of it. And yet, and then here's my most recent book, and I would say in a funny way, even though it's a ridiculously, kind of wide-ranging, crazy book, and my life is not like that, I would say that it's probably my most autobiographical book in a funny way. Not so much the things that happen, but maybe in its voicing and its personality. And my other books have been so, they've dealt with kind of big historical issues and really traumatic periods in Korean history, and pretty thorny issues of identity and assimilation, stuff that's just stuff that requires a lot of reckoning by the characters. And so I think, in terms of what Brandon was talking about, you're inhabiting a space, and even it's not your own space, but the characters that I wrote in those pieces, in those works, we're, as every character is subject to what they're talking about. And in this one, in some funny way, I think, because it was, even though it has some realism, it's completely kind of made up. I think I let my own voice come into the book much more, and I think, I hate to admit it, because I always felt like I could hide in fiction, and that was kind of the fun and the point of it. But maybe I'm hiding a little less in this one. I was a dishwasher one summer, though, and an important job and informative experience.
Do you play golf? That section that you read?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do. I enjoy it. And, there are lots of things about golf, of course, that are completely distasteful, the way that it's set up. And, but the game itself, I enjoy. A lot of the stuff around it is a little...
Yeah. Yeah. The more you talk about, there's a prurient, aspect to when talking about golf. It feels like...
Well, Trump has ruined golf too.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Ximena Blanco asks, hi all, is there anything you do to cleanse your mind between projects? Is there a way that you shift and stop thinking about one story in order to start telling another?
I don't think so. I mean, I always feel like I'm working on something, or I want to be working on something all the time. You know, and it might be stuff that goes into the trash, you know, but I don't know. I just feel like if I'm not working on something, you know, the world seems off. And so I just need to have that, you know, that the idea of, you know, I'm working on this so I can think about it a lot. So I don't know. I mean, you know, I try to read as much and as widely as I can, you know, and that becomes a very nice space, you know, for myself at late at night, especially when I can sort of recline and you know and read when everybody else is asleep. You know, but and that kind of feels like, you know, you're sort of refueling, I guess, you know, in some ways. But I if if I'm not working on something, yeah, I'm always thinking about what I need to be working on next, if that makes sense. I don't know, but I don't know that there's really like a cleansing. I don't know.
Well, maybe if you lived in California, you know, there are local dispensaries here that you can do
Yeah.
a vision quest at any moment. Which moving here in 5 years ago, it's not a bad little thing to have. But for me, I think I've always felt that it's not so much a cleansing, but a reaction to a certain mode, psychic mode, aesthetic mode that I'd been in, say with a certain book. And for me, you know, my last book was it's just a, you know, the sense of that, and it's just a very circumspect and controlled kind of narrative and voice and sensibility, and I think I was, you know, just wanting to do something different, and that's usually what leads me in a certain way to cleanse, I suppose, or to leave that project. And just because, unless I'm super interested and want to do it again, but I usually don't, because I spent too much goddamn time with it and just you know, tortured it and myself too long. And so I'm always looking for a way just to, you know, keep moving. You know, we're all like sharks. We have to keep moving, unless and bad things happen if you don't. Especially, you know, writing long form fiction, I think. You don't get to finish stuff, you know, very often. You have to make a huge commitment, and so I feel as if I'm not completely fresh to not just a new story or character, but an entirely, you know, kind of different mode, maybe it's not enough to sustain me.
You probably have some really beautiful views out in San Francisco, don't you? That, I mean,
I do.
Yeah, I bet it's a beautiful landscape.
I mean, I lived in Princeton for many years, and Princeton, of course, is sort of described as Dunbar in this book. But you know, there they have a lot of beautiful trees,
Yeah.
and you know, that's and you know, some lovely old architecture, but not the natural beauty that, you know, just the Bay Area and, you know, Golden Gate Bridge.
I have the desert all around my
That's
house.
gorgeous.
Yeah, so,
That's gorgeous. The desert's gorgeous.
In the distance, when you can see the Oregon Mountains, it's very nice. You know, but my backyard is all rock. You know.
Yeah,
so,
but what about those? You know, the blooms every once in a while of flowers, and you know, that's
it can be there. There can be
stunning.
Some
yeah.
Are either one of you reading anything that's particularly inspiring right now, or just good, or not good?
I'm just reading Tokyo Ueno Station. I don't know if you know about that book, and enjoying it. It's quite sad. death of a child and lost soul kind of story, but it's quite spare but beautiful. It's by Yu Midi, and then I'm just about to start Peter Hodavis's new novel, A Lie Someone Told You About Yourself, which I take it as an kind of auto fiction, which is cool, and I love Peter, and I think he's so smart and funny, and so I'm really looking forward to that one.
Of course, I'm reading. I have, I teach 3 classes, so I have lots of students right now that I'm sort of kind of buried in reading their work. But Chang's book is on my, dresser here. I was recently revisiting a Polish writer named Konwicki, who wrote a book called A Dream Book for Our Time. And it came out in early 70s maybe, or 70 around there. But Konwicki is his name. And I love how surreal that book is. And in some ways it informed the mythological parts of my book, where the darkening land, a character finds himself in this mythological place. And I find myself returning to Konwicki's book, novel, a lot. It's beautifully written and very, very strange, and underappreciated, I feel. He's an amazing writer, and the translation, well, I don't know that it's in here. It doesn't matter, but I mean, so that's what I sort of return to a lot, because I appreciate that novel so much.
Chang, what was the name and the author of the first book you mentioned?
Tokyo Ueno Station, and it's UENO. It's a train station, subway station in Tokyo, and it's UYU is the last name, Miri, MIRI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't know anything about her, but she's known, I guess they call her an outsider writer, which means she's not Japanese ethnically. So she's either Korean or Chinese or both.
Julie says the Polish book lists as $900.
Wow.
I will hunt around.
I think, yeah, I mean, I did not spend $900 on that book. It's like I may have spent $9 at most, probably, but I've had that book for many years, so I don't know. There has to be a reprint somewhere. I think it came from the old Penguin series that did. Penguin seems like they did a series of translations back in the 70s or something. Yeah, it's definitely worth, if you can find it somewhere. It's a gem. It's a hidden gem. So
we have one more, which is, do either of you take inspiration from mythology, or is your focus more on recent history? If so, how do you incorporate it into your work?
I really don't, but I want to hear Brandon, because I know that maybe he does.
Well, with this book, there's a book by a man named James Mooney, who documented old traditional Cherokee stories, over 100 years ago. And those stories arrived in Oklahoma orally, of course, and then he documented them. And so there's sort of you can call them mythology or the old stories, or sometimes they're referred to, but they were told, and I wanted to include those in a modern. So much of this book has to do with memory and storytelling, that so many characters, even the foster boy is a storyteller, and that it all sort of intergenerational trauma and comes out of, there's a storytelling that I wanted to include some of those old stories. So I had the ancestor spirit tell some of those stories. There are just so many of them that are out there, and they're beautiful, beautiful stories. Well, these are great links here that oh, you're putting those up. Okay, yeah. That's the only thing I've written, I think, that includes anything from, that would. I love mythology, though, even Greek mythology. I would love to do something fiction-wise.
Chang, could you comment on what sets your books in motion and how did it start?
Well, this last one was, even though this young fellow Tiller narrates the novel, the object of his inquiry and affection is this businessman Pong Lu, and he's the one who did set this book in motion. I had a friend who was the model for Pong, and friends like actually that friend. I just met a lot of people who were newer immigrants, very adept, different from the immigrants that I grew up with. People came over to this country and with kind of nothing and didn't speak the language, was kind of just anxious all the time, not really feeling like they understood how things went. This was a different kind of immigrant that I'd been meeting in my life of late, which is someone who you really felt as if they had a handle on everything, and maybe that's just our culture now. It's very globalized, lots of information, lots of data. So it's so ready and striving and all those things that we normally associate, but fearless and also charismatic. And so that I wanted to write a story about him, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to write this novel about this kind of fellow astride of cultures and ready to go out into the world. But then I kind of switched because I kept thinking about him and thinking, well, okay, he's an interesting character, but why am I so interested in this character? And then in the end, I decided I actually needed this other, protagonist and voice and consciousness to make sense of all that. Why that energy, why that kind of inspiration, means anything. Which is kind of something I tell my students all the time, which is, that first flush of inspiration is wonderful. It's generative. It leads, it opens up the whole world, but don't stop questioning it. Don't just leave it there, because maybe you're actually interested in an attendant notion or a corollary notion, and in fact more than the actual thing. Which for me, in terms of just my experience writing, has often been the case. We don't know what we really, really care about. I mean, we can feel it, but sometimes the more I suppose the more alluring aspects are not so available or obvious to us at the start. Those aspects that you can ask questions of through the work, where you're discovering rather than just kind of recounting what you already know.
I think that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you both so much for being here. Thank you to the audience for being here and for your great questions. We're here every Thursday, 7 o'clock for these readings. If you go to the NYU Creative Writing Program website, and if you missed any of this, we'll post a recording of it in the next few days. And I do, of course, hope to see all of you in person as soon as that's possible. But in the meantime, be well and be safe and have a wonderful night.
Thanks, Joanna. Thanks so much.
Thank
Miranda.
you.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, you
See
too, Chang.
See you someday in the flesh.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay.
We could watch Caddyshack or play golf, right?
Both.
I want to hear a full report about how that goes.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.